notwithstanding the challenges, please keep testing because I know a number of people are coming up with this virus again. We will start in about a minute. I'm just still trying to get us all to settle down. Colleagues or friends at home who had initially registered but can't make it because they're dealing with COVID, this is being live streamed. And I think we have the details of the live stream on the program, on the poster that went out to you. Are you okay? You want some water? It's okay, it's okay. Funmi, why don't you get us some water at the back? You have some. No, it's all right. We know everyone in the room is negative. As far as this is as of today. Do we have the lighting right? Do you hear me well? Yes, I hear myself. We will start because there's much to do. We have an exciting evening in front of us. Good evening, everyone. My name is Funmi Olonisakin. I'm Vice President for Global Engagement, in charge of International Affairs in short, at King's College, London. But I'm also Professor of Security, Leadership and Development in the School of Global Affairs at the African Leadership Center. And I'm very proud to be part of the faculty teaching and researching on our leadership programs at King's. This evening's event really foregrounds our global leadership program. Many of you know that in the School of Global Affairs, we have had African Leadership Centers programs on leadership and development, on security, leadership and society. But King's College London in September launched the Global Leadership Program. The first cohort of this program is in this room alongside their counterparts. I know that many of these students combined, about 75 in total, many of them are online, and sorry to many of you, for many of you who are suffering from COVID at this point in time. Thankfully, your symptoms are not as serious as they were about a year ago. I'm also having to open this program this evening, even though I was planned to moderate it, on behalf of our Senior Vice President, Evelyn Welch, Professor Evelyn Welch, Senior Vice President for Service, People and Planning, because she's isolating at the moment. Having said that, let me say a little bit about this evening. We have someone with us this evening who is giving this lecture and has a background that will be familiar to many of you. But before I say a little bit about him, let me say what makes the Global Leadership Program as exciting as it's turning out to be. The first is that ability of our students to survey the world, take theory in its full ramifications, try to translate it into elements of practice and action, make sense of the world. The second is that, in a sense, we are trying to find the finest expression of the transformative qualities of students who will themselves be global leaders or all responding to the global challenges of their times. One element of this program is practicing leadership. Practicing leadership is like no other at King's because it allows you to do your own translation of those theories and begin to interrogate the practice of leadership of others. But really, in order for you to make sense of your own leadership practice. Others came before us who had tried and tested many ideas, who had responded to real-life challenges in their times, and who have understood what it means to be resilient. And in all of that, at the core of practicing leadership is what we call Leadership Exchange and Insights Seminar Series, LIS for short. And this week, in this last couple of weeks, we have brought together visiting professors who are also, many of whom are leading practitioners at King's. They have been for the past 5 years, to be a central part of this Leadership Exchange and Insight Seminar Series. Many of our students have interacted with them directly, and I am pleased that some of them are with us this evening in this room. They have served as UN Special Envoys. Some are actually responding in real time to humanitarian situations in their parts of the world. Others, actually, one in particular has been Force Commander in UN peacekeeping operations. That is the kind of program that we're exposing our students to at King's. But this evening is very special because the opening lecture for us in this first year of the program is being given by one of our own. And I want to introduce him. I will not do it as elaborately because his lecture will speak volumes. But I want to read his bio and connect him in very intimate ways to this program that has started at King's. Dr. Dev Pragad is a media and technology executive, entrepreneur, and CEO of Newsweek, one of the world's most influential and recognized global news publications. Under his leadership, he transformed a failing readership base of a legacy 90-year-old publication, and many of you would have read about this, into a digital powerhouse with 100 million readers in just a few years. Shortly after his PhD from King's, and I have to say that all of his graduate education was at King's. One of our finest scholars on a scholarship here, moved straight from his BSc to PhD. One of our finest in what is now the Faculty of Natural Mathematical Sciences and Engineering Sciences, NMES. The dean of that faculty, Professor Bashir Al-Hashimi, speaks very excitedly about his recent engagement with Dev. But look at this. Shortly after his PhD from King's College London in 2009, Dev helped launch several businesses. After successfully managing Newsweek's international edition from London in 2014, he became CEO in 2016 and later joint owner in 2018. I'm sure you're asking, how has he done all of this? He's still in his 30s, all right? Pragad is an active entrepreneur, mentor, and advisor. In addition, he's a participant in the Owner-President Management Program at Harvard Business School. He continues to lead and revitalize Newsweek through the rapidly changing digital media landscape. I also happen to know that the Harvard Business School has made his a case study, Newsweek a case study, in the prestigious program. It is with such pride that I say to you that Dev Pragad happens to be one of the finest global leaders of a global icon. He comes back to King's to engage, to guest lecture here. He will be a very integral part of this program. And in the last couple of months, I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Dev, he has given King's the benefit of being able to announce the Pragad scholarships. And thanks to you, in this next month, we will be advertising 4 scholarships for King's, 2 on this Global Leadership Program, and the rest of that to your beloved department in Natural and Mathematical and Engineering Sciences. I warmly welcome you, Dev Pragad.
Thank you, Funmi.
Thank you. So, why don't I hand over to you? I shall come back on stage when your lecture is over.
Absolutely.
So that we can have a conversation.
I think I'm mic'd up here.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, good evening, everybody. Well, that was a very flattering speech by Professor Funmi. Professor Funmi and I met in 2017 in New York, and without her initiative, I would have never engaged with King's. She saw me before all of these things happened, and she believed in me, and she always supported me, so a very special thank you for that. I'm here today to talk about my journey at Newsweek, and along the way, we will explore some of the characteristics of being a resilient leader. King's is a very special place for me, because I spent 8 years of my youth here, right? From my late teenage to my early 20s, I have some of my warmest memories at King's. I tried very, very hard to find photos of me during my undergrad days. These are the pre-iPhone days, right, in the early 2000s, and I just could not. It's probably somewhere there in like some dead hard drive. I feel really terrible about it. So there are 3 very nice pictures here. Obviously, with me graduating with my parents, who sacrificed a lot for me to be where I am. With my brother, my dad and mom. I'm very grateful for them. And then there's a picture of me presenting my research work at a conference. I probably am a little bit overdressed for that. But I guess those were the days people try to be more formal, things have become rather casual these days. And finally, it's a background picture. For those of you who know it, it's our beloved Morgan Library. It's a place I spend so much time. I probably have walked every single floor there, because those were the days before social media and iPhones or smartphones, so people didn't have much to do. So we'd go hang out in the library, read books. And it's such a beautiful building, and you could just be lost there for a long time. So I spent countless hours studying there. I have nothing but incredibly warm and memorable memories at King's. And it gave me amazing opportunities too, right? People who believed in me, people who mentored me, supported me. I still remember Professor Agwami, who was heading up the Center for Telecoms Research, stopped me from going to Oxford for my PhD and said, this is a better place for you. And I'm really grateful for that. Probably if I went to Oxford, I won't be here, right? Because I would not have had met the people that got me these opportunities and so on. London is a very special place to study. It gives you amazing opportunities to network and meet some interesting people. And right at the tail end of it, Bell Labs wanted to hire me, and they said, before I finish my PhD, you can come and do your research there and finish your PhD. And he again said, no, don't do it, right? So we talk about leaders and mentors. It's very important we have right leaders and right mentors around us. So let's go into Newsweek. Newsweek does have a British connection, even though it's an iconic American brand. This person, Thomas Martin, is the founder of Newsweek. He's actually a Brit. He fought in World War I, and he lost a leg. And as a one-legged RAF fighter pilot, he goes to the US as Time Magazine's foreign correspondent. And while working at Time Magazine, he thinks, why don't I launch a competing magazine called Newsweek? So this is the very first issue of Newsweek from 1933. And it took off. Though he was not very successful as a businessman, others took over, and they scaled the business. Over a period of time, it became an extremely successful and an iconic publication, not just in America, but globally. And the fascinating thing about Newsweek is that we have nearly 90 years of archives and history, right? So you see a snapshot of every week as a cover, and when you play that out, it's pretty fascinating. You really can pinpoint the major issue of that particular time by looking at the covers. It's an extremely valuable asset we have. But it's been almost 90 years. It was predominantly for nearly all of its 90 years of print publication. But life changed in 2000s thanks to smart technical people. Internet was developed, World Wide Web was developed, cell phones were developed, mobile phones were developed, smartphones were developed. People started to change the way they consume information. Gone were the days people would go to a weekly publication for your news. Today, when something happens, you know it instantly. You don't even go to news source. You go to Twitter, people are tweeting, hey, I saw an explosion here, or this, that, right? So why would you go and pick up a weekly magazine? Multiple people bought Newsweek in the last 10, 15 years. It changed hands but with 2 billionaires. They probably must have put in at least $100 million or more in investment, and they failed. And then my predecessor and his company took Newsweek, and they did some pretty good stuff, but he used the brand to commit financial fraud, and he got indicted, and he almost went to jail, and he had a criminal felony. That was the lowest point of Newsweek. That's when I inherited Newsweek. So talk about walking into a crisis, it doesn't get worse than that, right? You're having a brand that's struggling for its identity and surrounded by all sorts of weird controversies. That's the kind of mess I inherited. I love this quote. And Newsweek has a cover to go with every major event in history, right, in the last 90 years. So this is a quote by President John F. Kennedy. He says something that's very interesting, right? We chose to go to the moon. We chose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. So there are some of us who like to do hard things. Because if it was easy, you know, the billionaires with the hundreds of millions of dollars would have turned it around, right? So some people like tough challenges. Actually kind of takes me back to my conversation. Funmi said I did my undergrad and went straight to my PhD, but that's a very funny story to it. My supervisor is not here. He was invited, but I'm sure he probably got pinged or something. So he was my undergrad thesis supervisor. So for my undergrad thesis, I go to him and I say, oh, I looked at all the projects. They all look very easy. Can you give me something harder? He kicks me out of the room and says, get lost. So the next week, I go back to him and I say, I'm serious, you know, like, challenge me, give me a harder project. He looks at me and says, no, and he kicks me out. So I go back again and I said, come on, you know, like, I want to challenge myself, give me something hard. So he actually gave me a master's project for my undergrad thesis. And he said, if you fail, it's your fault, right? Don't blame me. So somehow it went well. I ended up publishing a paper on the back of it. It went really well, so that's how I bypassed my master's and went straight to a PhD. I actually did a master's project for my undergrad. So some of us love doing hard things, right? And this was really, really hard. I probably underestimated it. If people had told me this is what you're going to face, I probably would have said no, thank you. But the journey of the turnaround had 3 major pillars before we go into the lessons. And without these 3 things, we would not have succeeded, right? First is building the right team. It doesn't matter how much of a hardworking leader you are, how smart you are, or whatnot. Without the right team, you just cannot make it. So these are the faces of Newsweek leaders, some of whom are here. But one particular person I would like to spotlight is Nancy Cooper. She's there with a scarf. So Nancy has been with Newsweek since 1980s, mid-1980s. She graduated from Harvard, came over to Newsweek, joined the letters department, writing back to readers who would write to the publication, right? She has climbed all the way up, and now she's the editor-in-chief of Newsweek. Well, there's also one more person, Dave Martin, who's been with Newsweek since 1989. 1988, so he doesn't look that old, but he's actually very old. But one of the things I've learned by talking to people who've been with Newsweek for a long time is their deep love and passion for the brand. So it was very important for me to have those sort of people in key leadership roles at Newsweek. So Nancy brings all of that, the rich history and the heritage of Newsweek. And then we have an amazing strategist above her, and then we have some brilliant digital people, most of them who are here, right from Newsweek, Laura, James, Alex, and so on. So we have a very diverse mix of people. And going forward, we are doubling down on our technology and data investment. We just hired a CIO, that's Sujai Nelson there. These are the people who are making the magic happen. All I'm doing is just pulling them together and inspiring them to do great work. Pillar 2, creating a culture of meeting. As we started to transform Newsweek and scale Newsweek, very quickly, we started to ask ourselves, what are we building? And why are we building this? We wanted to have meaning and purpose for the work we produce, for the content we produce. We started to verbalize this over a 1 or 2 year period. And when we did our research, the constant feedback that kept coming back to us was Newsweek was a beloved publication, primarily across America. America can be a very divided place, right? But people across the political and cultural spectrum loved Newsweek. So we thought it's very important for us that we define a clear mission statement. It actually took us 3 months to produce these 3 bullet points. We would meet every week, once a week. We would come up with things. We let it mature, come back, revise it again and again. But it really guides and governs what we do, right? So Newsweek speaks to and listens to readers across the political and cultural spectrum, because we wanted to be a publication that goes across the political and cultural spectrum, which is very, very important for us. We explain, expound, and clarify the most important issues of our time with journalism that's fair, factual, authoritative, and accessible. We like to set the bar high. Often we may fail, but you have to set the bar high. We wanted to be a fair publication. But how do you define what is fair? As we start to look into it, we are not sure. So we are embarking on a project about how do we measure our own fairness so we can hold ourselves accountable. In an era of fake news, we want to be known for being factual. So whenever we make mistakes, we have a correction page where we are transparent about our mistakes. We want to hold ourselves accountable, right? We want to be an authoritative and an impactful place that produces great journalism. And we also want to be accessible, right? We want Newsweek to be a publication for people across both the cultural, political, and also, it's not just for the ultra high-end people. We believe in vigorous, respectful, and honest debate is in the public interest and welcome diverse views and voices. In my view, that's classical liberalism, right? So we really welcome everyone and every viewpoint. The third pillar is a growth mindset and ambitious goal setting. This is something I'm so grateful for, an amazing team who have been so supportive of me. Every time I would come up with what I would think a crazy goal, they'd be like, yeah, let's go and do it. Research has shown time and time again, not just one research, but multiple research has shown teams and companies that set big, ambitious goals always outperform those who do not. Research has shown that. I actually did not know that. When I first set up a goal, I wanted Newsweek to be a big publication, so we met a lot, and I said, let's aim for something big, a North Star goal like 100 million. I didn't realize how much scientific work was done about the positive impact of setting a big, ambitious goal. So one of the most interesting privileges I had, and I talk about this a lot, was when I spent some time with the CEO of Moderna, the vaccine manufacturer, Stefan Bancel. Most people had never heard of Moderna until COVID hit, right? Now it's a household name. But his journey was very fascinating. He joined Moderna as employee number 2 when no one believed in mRNA technology. And he left a job for a public company in France, where he probably was making a lot of money, because he believed in what this could do and how this could transform. This is 10 years ago, right? And he always believed in a 10x mindset or a 10x mentality. And he pushed his team so hard and inspired them. And he would say, every year, we are a different company to what we were a year before. We may have the same name, but every year we were transforming so fast. And when COVID had hit, his company was ready to produce the vaccine in 2 months, which is record-breaking time. I often use this example as leaders to say, what would have happened if Stefan and his team had failed? And on the other hand, BioNTech and that team had failed, right? These are the 2 major vaccines that are vaccinating everyone against COVID. And I use that as an example to say, quality leadership really, really matters, right? When leaders step up and perform, the value that society benefits from them is immense. Setting big, ambitious goals is one thing, but how do you execute them, right? So we use a framework called OKRs. OKRs stands for Objective and Key Results. It's a very measurable way of tracking performance. It was born at Intel. Well, we could spend a week talking about this. It's so fascinating. It was born at Intel. developed by an amazing executive called Andy Grove, who eventually became the CEO of Intel and transformed Intel, and through which transformed modern-day computing, right? And then a gentleman called John Doerr, who was working at Intel, learned this, went to a venture capital firm, and every company his venture capital firm will invest in, he would go and teach OKRs. So he goes and teaches OKRs to a company in 1998, and that company had 30 people, and it was Google. So Google today runs on OKRs. Everything they do is measurable and is trackable using OKRs. Deploying that at Newsweek was so remarkable and so powerful. Using that framework, we were able to realize our own capacity. We were actually underestimating ourselves. We were not setting ambitious enough goals, because when we set ambitious goals and we use OKR frameworks, we actually exceeded them. And the very theory says if you are meeting and exceeding your goals, you're not stretching big enough, right? So that was eye-opening for us, and that drove so much of the growth for us. So fast forward to 2022, when I first said, when we were 8 million in 2017, that we are going to be 100 million publication, people laughed and mocked us in media. That's a long way to go for us still in terms of breaking big scoops and so on. We are working very hard on it. In that time period, our revenue has jumped nearly 600% since 16, and we have been profitable since 2019, right? So let's dive into some of the key lessons. Lesson 1, out of adversity comes opportunity. One of the key things about being resilient is when you face a challenging situation, what are the emotions that you go through? Is it chaos, panic, or are you calm and able to see through all the chaos and see opportunities? So one of my Harvard professors always says, when you look at a metric and it looks bad, the flip way to look at that is like, look at the room for growth. This is your opportunity. This is not a problem. This is your opportunity, right? So I had the benefit of being an outsider when I came into Newsweek, because things were just so bad. It was such an adverse situation. But I had a clear vision what I wanted Newsweek to be. We could have gone in so many different directions. We decided to go for scale. One of the things Nancy would always tell me was in the old Newsweek, they would always say Newsweek is mass with class. So we wanted to be a widely read publication. That's why a lot of people know about Newsweek in the digital world. But we also want to continuously improve on quality and increase our class, right? So for me, that was 100 million. And I had a very clear plan. One of the key things is, if as a leader, you're not very clear in your head what you want to achieve, how can you expect those around you to have a clear understanding of what you want to execute? So it's incredibly important you spend a lot of time developing clarity in your own head. Once that's there, people can sense the confidence that comes from you, right? The clarity of vision that comes from you, and it's so much easier to inspire people around you. Number 2, it's not about the leader. And not about the senior leaders as well in the company. It's people like this who make Newsweek great, right? This is our culture ambassadors in the US. We also have cultural ambassadors in the UK. On the left, that's Melissa Jewsbury, who produces the print magazine and the digital edition of the magazine every week. All the beautiful artwork you see, all the beautiful editing, production, it's all happening because of her. Tom O'Connor breaks some of the biggest exclusives for us. Without his hard work, Newsweek won't be this famous. When someone writes a great story, a lot of you read, it's people like that. Then there's Catherine on the breaking news team, Olivia on the video team, Patricia on the ad sales team. These are the people who are doing all the hard work. If as a leader, I'm not connected to them, I don't have any insight into what's happening in the company, right? So it's very important to know and appreciate these people who are doing all the hard work. Lesson 3. Take every shot like it's your last. When I got into Newsweek, I had no choice but to work that way, because if I did not, the company would go bust, right? So literally every shot was our last shot. But as things started to improve, very soon, our team had such intensity because they were ambitious. They were determined to do something great. So we continued to take every shot like it was our last shot. So think about it. What sort of intensity do you go to work every day? What sort of intensity and focus do you have? When things are now going well, one of the challenges I have now is I keep reminding our team, do you still take every shot as though it's your last shot, or are you complacent, right? It's when things are going very well, One of my good friends, he runs a big public finance company in India, and he always says, when things are going really well, that's when you have to work as though you're about to die. If you work like that, you will never have any problems. So when things are going well, just don't chill out. Work hard as though you're going to die. He can be a bit extreme. Maybe that's why he's so successful, but that's an interesting piece of advice. It takes a lot of intensity to work that way, but if you look at high-performance teams and high-performance cultures, they have that common trait. It doesn't mean just working extra long. It's being intense and focused. Pursue diverse perspectives. I think our mission statement is a great example of that because most of the legacy mainstream media have become very, very progressive. So when we took this, a different perspective, we faced a lot of challenge even internally. Because even within our senior management team, people were across the spectrum, right? But as we debated and discussed this, it brought all of us together in our shared values because we believe that's needed in today's society, right? To bring people who don't share common values or common perspectives into a meaningful debate and discussion is a service to society. So we really believe in that. And pursuing a diverse perspective also means as a leader, you have to be a good listener. If you're not a good listener, how can you open your mind to a critical way of thinking? How do you ensure that the way you are thinking is not always the best way of thinking? Resilient leadership is a journey. So one of my favorite phrases is called Kaizen. It's a Japanese term. It literally translates as continuous improvement. So if you're in a leadership position, you come across these fancy names. How do you take these fancy names and implement it into your organization and drive material, meaningful value, right? There are these two famous case studies at Harvard Business School. One of them studies how Toyota came into America when General Motors was the biggest car manufacturer, and within a period of a decade transformed the car industry, right, and became the biggest car manufacturer, because they took this concept of Kaizen into the manufacturing floor so that the moment anyone finds any issue, they're supposed to pull what's called an and-on card, and they're all supposed to focus on fixing the problems. They would have meetings called Kaizen meetings where everyone is supposed to come up with things that they're not doing well. And then they focus on how do they fix it, right? It's this relentless focus on all the issues and how do you keep perfecting them, right? Within 10 years, the amount of recalls on GM continued to remain high, but Toyota hardly had any car recalls. So, what would people buy? They would want to buy a car that doesn't get recalled, right? And before you knew, they were the biggest car manufacturer in the whole world. And then there was a company called Danaher that pretty much copied everything Toyota did, but they took it into a business environment, right? They built something called the Danaher Business System, and they encouraged everyone in the company to continuously keep improving. If they achieve something, then the next thing they're supposed to do is to rip it apart and write a new plan that will better the previous achievement continuously. When they deployed this plan, their revenue was $200 million. That was in the late 80s. Today, their revenue is $28 billion, and the market cap is $180 billion. So if you're really looking at how important mindset and concepts are, it doesn't get better than these examples. Values matter. As a leader, values really, really matter. We all have values, subconscious values, right? Values define who you are. But have you tried to articulate it? Because people around you care about the values you have as a leader. So I had the privilege of going through a lot of executive coaches, and one of my coaches, she really pushed me very hard in defining what are my core values. And as I wrote them down and I looked at it, I started to think quite differently. And I started to think about partnerships I would have, people I would do business with, people I would engage with. Are these people who share similar values? Are these the people I want to work with, partner with, and so on? And these things really, really make a big difference, especially if you want to inspire people to follow you, right? An extremely powerful example that I find so much inspiration right now is what's happening in Ukraine when President Zelensky is standing up for the values of freedom and is able to galvanize the whole nation and the world in this matter. I find that just so inspiring, right? Values really, really matter. Obviously, lack of values can cause a lot of problems. Move fast and be bold. There's always apprehension about embracing new technology or new opportunities. We at Newsweek embraced what we call the off-platform strategy, where we started to publish our content not just on our own website or our own printed magazine, but wherever our audience were. And we moved super fast into Apple News and other publications, other platforms, and as a result, our readership has grown exponentially, so has our revenue. Were we hesitant and slow, we might have missed all that opportunity. Finally, resilience takes practice and humility. Every time you face a challenge and you overcome it, you become a stronger and a better leader. It's all about training your mind and your brain what to do when you face a challenge. And people around you see that happening and they gain confidence. And over a period of time, you become very resilient. It's not something that happens overnight. And it also takes a lot of humility because often you don't have the idea. It's people around you who have the idea. It's totally okay to be vulnerable to your leadership team and say, hey, I really don't know what's going on here, but we need to fix this issue. What are we going to do? How are we going to find a strategy out of this? Or what is the best way to deal with this? And most often than not, it's my team. When I've made myself vulnerable to them, I've come up with the best ideas. So humility really matters. Well, one can't help but draw parallels from Dante's Divine Comedy and my journey at Newsweek. The first 2 years were total hell. I can assure you that. It was painful, agonizing, and super difficult. The next 2 years were okay, more manageable. It was like being in the purgatory. And finally, we are in a very stable path. I don't want to say we're in heaven, but we are in a very stable path. The question now for us is, what's next for Newsweek, right? Do we still continue to take every shot as though it's our last? Do we aim for a 10x mentality from here? What are the amazing things we are going to do next from here? People often ask me, when did you realize you kind of turned around Newsweek and you made it, right? You know, is it because when you looked at your EBITDA, when you looked at the cash in the bank or the profit? For me, it was this moment. This is me with my editor-in-chief, Nancy Cooper, at Harvard Business School teaching the Newsweek case study. Professor Linda Applegate is in the middle. She's quite a phenomenal woman. She has been with Harvard for 30 plus years, Harvard Business School. She calls me one day and says, Dev, I want to do a case study on Newsweek. I was like, you're serious? She's like, yes, I'm serious. And Suraj Srinivasan, who's the gentleman there, Professor Srinivasan, he calls me up and says, I also want to do a case study on your implementation of OKRs. So they both joined forces and they wrote a pretty engaging case study on the transformation and the execution using OKRs. And that's when it really sunk in. Gosh, you know, we have done something quite remarkable. And that was also very rewarding, given my academic background, to be part of such a prestigious school, to be there and to teach it. I'm back again in 2 weeks. That was really satisfying and also very humbling. Finally, this is my senior-most leadership team, our executive team: Leanne, Nancy, Rosie, Matt, Alvaro, Diane, Amit. My CTO is missing there. Without these people, I absolutely won't be standing here. Plus also some amazing people over there in the front who are like superstars in my UK office, and Alex over there. Without these people, we just won't be here, right? So I see myself as a coordinator who pulls together an amazing team who are doing an amazing job. And I'm proud of the work they do. I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to work with such amazing people. With that, I will end my talk. Thank you so much for listening.
each time, not just about the Newsweek story, about your story as well. If you like, you can also invite some of your colleagues to answer some of the questions, because so our students understand that leaders and leadership are interrelated. They're not exactly the same thing. As a leader coming from outside and taking over Newsweek at that point in time, what do you think made your colleagues stay? Because you talk about some of these colleagues have been there. Someone like Nancy has been there forever, all right? Many of these colleagues are, are the backbone. Your senior managers make things happen, as you said. But of course, is it John Cotter that talks about what leaders really do and then tries to look at leadership and management as working towards the same purpose? But they're two different things. At a point in time when things were really, really, really down for the institution, and you came in, why do you think they stuck it with you?
Wow, that's such a fascinating question, and one I think I should really ask them at some point. Well, I'm trying to speculate here for them, but let me flip that question around and say what they brought to the table, right? I still remember that was one particular bad day, and I was really thinking, what am I going to do, or a particular bad period. And one day, Nancy and Diane come to my room, and they say, Dev, I don't think so bad, but tell us, what do we need to do to turn this business around? Just give us the KPIs, we will go and get it done. And that day was just quite phenomenal for me, and I was like, gosh, I got such an amazing team. And I pulled my CFO and my COO together. We dug deep into the business, came up with these are the KPIs we got ahead, and if you hit it, we will transform this business and we will make it out, right? So I think we had a bunch of people who believed in the vision of what we could make Newsweek into. They saw the challenges predominantly as the challenges we inherited rather than the one we created. And then you needed to have different solutions for those problems, right? One was the ongoing problem and the issue of transforming Newsweek, and the other one was the legacy problem that we inherited. And then we had a mix of teams that were able to focus and look at those things and solve them independently of each other. And I think the more you dissect a problem and you break it down, things become easy to solve. If you just look at one huge problem, then it's a big problem to solve. But the more you break it down, it becomes a lot easier. So I think it's a combination of things. And also, I have to say, I was just very lucky to have a lot of amazing people around me.
That's interesting, the question of luck. But we'll come to that in a minute. Maybe one quick thing. Please think of your questions, and I'll take a couple at a time, and we'll talk about it. Let's talk about your preparation. What prepared you for the Newsweek takeover? What is it in the previous decade? Because actually, all of this period, you left King's when? From 2009.
Yeah.
Yes. So really, in a space of 12, 13 years, you have done, and actually before now, you faced that challenge by 2018. In a space of 9 years, 10 years, from leaving King's, you had done all of that. What is it, what would you say prepared you for that? Was it just, did you just step in and say, I want to do this? Or do you think particular things prepared you?
Well, I guess I'm quite a stubborn person. Once I put my mind on something, I don't like to give up. I guess that would have either destroyed me or made me very successful, and I think thankfully it has made me quite successful. I think I love a challenge. I love when things get difficult. My wife always says, you really thrive under pressure. When things are really difficult, that's when I seem to kind of, in a unique way, enjoy it, because it just pushes me hard and brings the best out of me. And I think in many ways, being thrown into the deep end of doing a PhD when I was 20, 21 was very helpful, because I didn't realize, I just was not emotionally ready for going down that path, but I had no choice but to really be successful in that. And being the determined person I was very keen to succeed in whatever challenges I take on. And the sheer complexity of the problems I had to solve kind of prepared me mentally for it. And then, of course, I learned to do a lot of the business in London. When I was here, got into digital media. I spent a lot of time studying, spent a lot of time talking to people, analyzing things. So when I did get into Newsweek, at least in my mind, I saw a pathway forward, right? A clear pathway, which thankfully has come out true.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Let's take a couple of questions, and I'll come back with other things. Yes, I'll take two here straight. I think that was you, Megan. Yes. Yeah.
Hello.
Take the mic here.
Hiya, my name's Megan. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, I just wanted to know, like, what is next for Newsweek? Obviously, you've achieved all these amazing things, and I wanted to know what is next and what your map is, if you like, for achieving it. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's an exciting question. You know, we've come a really long way, but I still think we have so much we need to do. You know, we still are not producing the level of exclusive stories that we need to do. We're building up our separate OKRs for it. How do we create high impact journalism at Newsweek? How do we measure it? How do we track it? How do we invest into it? How do we become a fairer publication? How do we produce better debates? How do we get into scale our podcast business? Do we get into a video business, and so on? We have so much strategic initiatives right now. One of the challenges we actually have is we're struggling to execute a lot of them, because just having big vision is one thing. If you do not know how to execute them, they just remain great ideas, right? And people will be like, well, they probably were bad ideas. The problem was that they were not bad ideas. We just were not able to execute them very well. So I think just fixing some of these things and continue to scale, making our website to be more engaging, increasing the number of repeat users we have to the site. How do we scale up our subscription business, which we haven't yet turned the dial on because we want to scale. We want to build engagement, and then naturally we want to use AI and machine learning to digest what sort of users are likely to subscribe and not likely to subscribe, right? My CIO told me every day we produce 22 gigabytes of data every single day. It's just impossible for any of us to make sense of it. We're not even looking into it. But when you embrace machine learning and AI, you can start to make sense of it. It's probably a treasure trove of information which you're not even digging into, right? As we start to dig into it, what are the opportunities that may come up? I don't know. So that's a lot of work to do for us.
Thanks. Amelia.
Yes, hello. Thank you for being here with us. I think you've discussed a lot about your team, and that kind of reminded me of the concept of dispersed leadership. And I just wondered how you kind of create a culture within Newsweek, or what it is about the culture in Newsweek that kind of ensures leadership is dispersed across lots of different levels.
Well, it's something we're still working on. And as we started to scale, when we were really small, a lot of things were just centered around me and a handful of people. But as things started to scale, it became very evident all the leaders have become bottlenecks. So even out of business necessity, we have to spread and distribute our leadership, right? We got to empower a lot more people further down to take critical decisions so that the business can really start to scale. They just cannot be like, well, I'll wait for Dev to say or Nancy to say or someone up that to say what to do, because we're all drowning with so much work that's happening. But also some of the best ideas come from people who are closer to the market, right? For people who are dealing with customers, dealing with readers, or dealing with what's happening on the ground, rather than someone like me who may be just, isolated or insulated from a lot of those things. So it's very important that we have our finger on the pulse and we try and push down leadership, or at least feedback from those people who are, in touch with the market.
Great, thank you. Thanks. As I listen to you, this issue of the data that you generate on a daily basis makes me think that the natural partnership between a university, a place like King's, and Newsweek is there. Because look at the students in your former faculty. What could they do with that data? You talk about AI. I'm not putting you on the spot, Tolu. I see you, nodding your head. We met in the lift. You said you're in physics department. Reflect on some of that. I'll come to you in a moment, because really this is how, this is how people grow, how institutions grow, how relationships grow, but actually how problem solving occurs when you use other minds to really, really connect with some of the problems, the challenges, or in fact, even the discoveries that you have. But let me get the next set of questions. Is that you, Wekesa? Online. Oh, sorry. Of course, we're live streaming. Can you read the question from online, please?
Okay, so there's a question here. Where does work-life balance come into transformative leadership? Could you transform Newsweek or any other organization working on a healthy Monday to Friday, 9 to 5? Or if not, and the person asking the question strongly suspects you did not and do not work on a typical 9 to 5 schedule, how sustainable is that? Can you and your team around you continue to work at a transformative rate indefinitely?
Wonderful.
Yeah, that definitely did put me on the spot. The assumption is pretty spot on. I worked probably, I even lived near my office so I could work late. There were days I've been in the office till 2 a.m. I would often be the last person to leave office at 8 or 9. But finally, I decided Newsweek is in a place where I can afford to take time off, right? I think my family has paid the price for it. I have kids. I want to spend time with them. I don't want to miss the time where they're growing up without me engaging with them. So I'm thinking a lot about these things. So being a leader is not easy. When you're put on the spot, there's a lot of difficult decisions you have to make, and you don't want to be the person who would disappear when things are difficult, right? You got to lead from the front and work hard and work long hours when needed. But I think there's also the notion of mental health, which is quite, really becoming a big thing. Work-life balance is very much connected to your mental health of you, your family, and the immediate people. And I still remember one of my Harvard professors really saying he was going to the dean and really emphasizing the importance of mental health. We teach all our students amazing strategies and the ability to execute strategies and so on. But what good is it if someone's mental health is not great, right? All the pressure kind of collapses them. How do you find the right and the healthy balance in a high performance environment is an extremely good question. And I think one we kind of have to keep thinking about, right? Because life satisfaction just does not come from being successful. It also comes from a broad range of things, right? That's a wonderful question.
Great, thank you. Yes. I think that's you, Ali. Yes.
Hi, Dev. A question leading on from that. Can you talk a bit more about mindset, which you mentioned? So the photo of your family, your mum, your dad, your brother, do they have a similar mindset to you? Is it a Pragad family thing? Or is it something that you have actively practiced, learnt, looked at new techniques? Slightly different from mental health maybe, but the mindset that you're applying to achieve your success.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think my dad is a little similar to me. He was always very ambitious, and he told me to aim high. And I guess he also drove a lot of the importance of excellence, and the importance of doing things really, really well. It may sound a simple thing, but the cumulative effort of a lot of hard work of doing things with excellence adds up to something formidable, right? The momentum of that really adds up into something formidable. And I think I've just had the privilege of meeting a lot of great people, surrounding myself with people who have done amazing things. That's always motivated me and inspired me. I think it's very important to have people around you who are constantly shaping you in a very positive way, and you got to seek that out. And that's your motivation or our motivation, right? If you have the motivation then, and you surround yourself with those right sort of people, which I guess is also mindset, right? You have a mindset for seeking out those sort of things. And then before you realize you want to do something interesting, you want to do something ambitious, you want to do something meaningful. So yes, mindset is very, very important.
Thanks. We have a question here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Building on the question of sustainable leadership, I was thinking what you have to say about inclusive leadership. I work for the Global Institute for Women's Leadership here at King's, and thinking about what's the role of a leadership that also includes women, not being able to stay in the office until 2 a.m. but still be transformational in your leadership.
So that's such an interesting question, and I did a podcast recently where I really spoke in depth about it, because I have 3 daughters, and I still remember when my 3rd daughter was born, there was someone who said, "Oh wow, good luck," which really pissed me off. Being a dad of 3 daughters is very interesting, right? And, whenever I meet parents who have 3 daughters, we have very interesting conversation. We talk about equality, and I still remember I was talking to a good friend of mine who's the provost of NYU, and she has 3 daughters. And she was talking about her daughters are much older than mine, and one of her daughters was going out for a party, and she was taking a drinks with her, and both she and her husband independently gave an advice to her: drink only what you take and don't drink anything else. And we both were discussing, if she had 3 boys, she probably would not have given that advice, right? So when you really talk about equality, it even goes to things, this is obviously from a parent angle, right? I think equality comes when you probably give the same advice to if you had a son or a daughter, right? There's so much things in society that still has to change for that. But at Newsweek, it's taken me a while. And looking at my daughters, I constantly keep seeing how their brain works so differently to mine. And they have such a different perspective to mine. And, we have quite a few senior leaders who are women in our company. And when I look at a problem and I come up with a trivial answer, and later on someone, this particular individual, she looks at it and she then calls me, Dev, I think you really missed the problem here. This could actually be really a big problem. And I think a woman's brain is able to look at things so differently to a male brain. And I think there's so much more value organizations can have by having women in leadership positions, having more women in leadership positions, right? I would probably single out a recognition to one of my Harvard professors, Boris Groysberg, because he does a lot of research on that and about the importance of gender equality in businesses. And he would even say things like, if you're a guy and you go to an interview in a leadership position and you say, I have 3 kids, the people there will be like, oh, wow, this guy is serious. And, they see you in a positive way. If you're a woman and you go and say, I have 3 kids, they'll be like, oh, boy, when things go bad, what is she going to do, right? So how do you balance this out, right? Is that a negative for a woman, or is it that she may actually have even more capacity because she's able to handle so many more complex things? So I think, and he emphasized the importance for men to keep talking about these issues more, because men still hold important positions of power. And his view was, if you, with a dad with 3 daughters, don't do that, who else is going to do that, right? So his research is very interesting. He keeps emphasizing that as a man, he also has daughters, that if we don't do the part as dads with daughters, then who else is going to do that, right? So I think we all need to think quite deeply about it, start to see the value of having more women being represented. And it also goes back to the point I made about diverse perspectives, right? In order to have diverse perspectives, you've got to have diversity of people in a room to give those diverse perspectives as well.
Thank you. And thanks for that question. Natalie.
Hi. So I wanted to ask you a question a little bit more focused on leadership. Some of the work that I do looks at the role of influence in the leader-followership relationship. And I recently submitted my PhD, and I looked at the 6th of January Capitol riot. And I was curious in that study what role mis and disinformation played in the build-up to that event. And some of the things I found was it's far more complicated than I think we often understand, and the pathways from individuals on social media, but all the way up to Donald Trump or his sons or other actors in that event. Steve Bannon played roles too, but there's a lot more coming up from the ground and being pulled up. And there's a role in there for the media. And I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit, because something that you mentioned in your talk was the role of fake news and how to combat it. And I know it's something that Newsweek has had a few instances of actually having to deal with. I think probably most notoriously is that Professor Eastman article that was used by certain actors to talk about Kamala Harris's eligibility to be vice president. And your approach was to put a notice on it, leave it up, and have that transparency, which I think is you discussed. So I was just wondering if you could delve a little bit more further into that, because I think, especially as we move into the modern era, and this moment of social mobility that we're kind of seeing with social media, the importance of understanding mis and disinformation,
Right.
And how to combat it.
Right. Now that's a fascinating point you've made. And all of that just re-emphasizes the importance of brands like Newsweek to really stand up and do the job really, really well. I think, we have the humility to accept that there's a lot of mistakes we have done, but we have learned from them. We have tightened up our processes. Obviously the editor's note in that particular op-ed speaks for itself, right? I don't want to comment on that. But misinformation is a huge, huge issue. And people need to be able to trust media once again. A lot of the reason is because people feel media has isolated them or does not represent their interest properly. How do you rebuild that credibility and trust with your readers, right? And I think in many ways, brands like ours do have an issue. There was a time when Newsweek assumed Donald Trump will not win and had gone ahead and printed a special issue called Madam President, right? That assuming Hillary Clinton would win. So people assume media conspires with these people and works with prejudice rather than really being fair and accurate. So they try to bypass media and try to do their own stuff, and social media gives rise to that. And I think those perhaps are our own shortcomings, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to higher standards and work even harder to regain the trust of the readership that we have lost.
Thank you. We have someone else online. I'll begin to bring us to a close steadily. Are you going to say something after? No, I'm looking at you. Tolu, physics? Yes, thank you. But let's hear another question from online.
So in formulating a vision for an organization like Newsweek, how do you present your vision in a way that gets people to buy into it?
Well, that's quite easy because we develop the vision together with the leadership team. So it's never my vision. We have strategy sessions where we open up the floor and we go through brainstorming sessions. Obviously, I said, we want to be a very impactful publication, right? So then we work together with the team to see where our investment has to go, what are the teams we have to build, and so on. We want to get deeper into technology. We want to embrace big data. So then we work with our team to figure out, what are the things we have to do. I think it's very helpful to be consultative when you are developing a vision, rather than saying, hey, I have the 10 commandments for Newsweek, just go and believe and do this, right? It never works like that. And again, if my idea is wrong, it's very dangerous because I have a very powerful position. Once I say this is what we will do, everyone moves in the direction. And if that's a wrong path, it's so dangerous for the whole company and for everyone, right? So that's a role I take very seriously, to make sure my team can also openly criticize me and challenge me in the idea, right? Because if I do say a stupid comment or a stupid idea, I do want my team to say, well, that's not a very smart thing to say. And I think that's where having a lot of humility is very helpful.
Thank you. Let me go to you, Tolu. I know I have a question up front, but Tolu, what do you have to... Can you please take the mic? Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Dev. Thank you for answering those questions. As Professor Funmi said, I'm doing my master's in physics right now, and my undergrad was in engineering, so it was quite interesting to see that you came from an engineering background. My question is kind of two in one, but how do you think your background in science and tech has helped you in this role, in this leadership role? Do you have a unique perspective that you bring to it? And also, you've mentioned about data and machine learning a lot, which has developed so much in the last 40 years. What are the active steps you're taking to kind of enter that world where, data's being commodified and used in that way? So those
okay. That's a great question.
I was interested in getting someone from your faculty to ask you a question.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks.
Yeah, being part of the technology background was very helpful because I saw the way of solving this is to embrace technology and to embrace digital media. Because Newsweek is a news business, but it's running on top of digital media, right? So really making sure our investment went to the right places in the beginning, early on, was very helpful, whether it be our content management system, investing in developers and so on. Those sort of things were very, very helpful, right? When resources are very constrained. And also, it gave me an extremely analytical mind to process a lot of complex information, because when you solve hundreds of pages of math equations time and time and time again, your mind does think a little differently. You're not faced by problems that are thrown at you. You just kind of calm down. You look at like, okay, how do I solve this big problem? How do you dissect these into smaller problems? And how do you go about solving all of these things one after the other, right? So from that perspective, it was immensely valuable. And going forward, it's reached a point where technology and especially in computer science and so on, things have gone so far ahead. Like I'm like a total novice now. So I need to rely on experts. So I just hired a new CIO to kind of come in, just look at big data and go deep into big data, right? These are such vast fields. People have, there are companies with thousands of people just working on these problems, right? It's all about building good partnerships to create acceleration. If you were to build everything in-house, it's going to take us years. How do you partner with the right teams, right people to create and add value to the business? So those are the things we're working on right now.
Great. Thank you. I will have a final question, but I will ask that. Graham? Graham is our visiting professor. He lives in New York, same as you. He has a question.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating. Two very quick questions. The one is about the distinction between management and leadership. Because in so many of our institutions, institutional power and authority is wielded by reference to span of control, size of budget, size of projects, as opposed to innovation, creative thinking, thought leadership. And I'm really interested in whether you have tracks of opportunity and seniority that are about leadership as opposed to management. And the second question is about this use of the word resilience. I'm really interested in whether or not you've thought about whether or not there are arenas of resilience that you have to deal with that are actually negative resilience, where practices become entrenched, change becomes survivalist rather than, or adaptive at best, rather than transformative, and how we think about making sure that resilience is always about transformational approaches rather than merely survivalist, which I imagine in a business sense is terrible, but from a peace-building point of view is really fundamental, because so often we think about people as resilience because they are dealing with terrible things in their lives, rather than resilience, which is about transforming the root causes of those things.
Yeah. Well, two very deep questions. It's definitely coming from an academic, you could see that. Well, I guess we could debate all night about, how do you structure management and leadership, right? I mean, management is a framework that you put together for the effective, efficient operation of an organization. And leadership actually does not have to rely or live only in particular number of people. It could come from anyone in the company, right? So if there's a particular issue, that's why we created the culture ambassadors in the company, because we wanted to empower some of our younger staff with more leadership roles to kind of bring issues that some of our ground staff may be facing to the management team who are not connected to them, right? So it's also a bit of a yin and yang in the sense that, do you get very formalized with the entrenched management structure, or do you decentralize and go horizontal and you empower a lot more people to have leadership roles as well? Because, if you look at some of the, creative, innovative tech companies and so on, the things are very flat, right? They don't have this like management style, like this C-level, SVP level, EVP level, and so on. So that's how I would see it. It's a very complex question. It's an academic question. We could spend all night debating and talking about it. But the point on resilience is very interesting, because it's so true. Because when people are faced with a lot of issues, they become very resilient to change, right? It becomes negative. One of the interesting things that I've learned in life is there's no correct answer and a wrong answer for anything, right? Sometimes what may be a correct answer is actually a wrong answer in a different environment or a different scenario. So I think that's where being nimble and flexible in your mindset when you're approaching a problem is very helpful, because you can't just blanket say resilience is a great thing. It can be a great thing, but it can also be a very, very bad thing. Likewise, intense focus and determination can be a very good thing, but it may just destroy your personal life, right, or your family life. Is it worth it? How do you balance and create, equity on these things? And I think maybe that's something, we all need to spend more time talking about, right? Success is actually a mix of things. How do you create the right mix may also change, and as leaders, do we have the flexibility of mind to embrace that and adapt to that?
Thank you so much. I don't want to miss anyone. So if someone has a burning question, let me see your hand shoot straight up. Honey, right. Please ask. And Wekesa, I hope you looked online. There are no questions that we are missing. There's one. Okay, so I'll hold my peace.
Hello, I want to ask a question. Is that because after graduated, maybe most of our students will get for a job. I believe that the Newsweek have a good job culture in the career, but maybe in some job, they didn't have a lot of good job culture. As an individual, how can we adapt to this environment, or just to make some change? Yes. And the second question is that as the leadership student, we always talk about how can we be as a good leader, you should be what things. But at the first time, how can we be the good leader? That means how can we as successful as you are? Yes, that's my questions.
Well, just hope for luck. I don't know. I guess just work hard. You just cannot replace hard work. I'll be very honest, I never sought out to be in this position. I'm quite an introverted person. I just like to work really hard. I like to solve problems. I like a challenge. And I just find myself here, having solved a lot of problems. I'm suddenly having all the spotlight put on me. I'm like, wow, what is this? And I still remember when the Harvard process was showing so much attention on me. I was like, why are they so interested in me? It was a very interesting phase. So it's fascinating where a lot of hard work can take you to, right? Determined, tenacious hard work, where it can take you to.
Thank you. Online.
Okay. How do you balance laxity and rigor while keeping your team motivated to produce excellent work?
Can you repeat that question again, please?
How do you balance laxity and rigor while you keep your team motivated at all times? Laxity.
How do you balance laxity and rigor?
Yeah.
To
keep your team, motivated.
To keep my team motivated. Well, I'm quite a hands-off person. I don't micromanage my team. At least those who work directly with me, we don't tend to track the work hours or anything, because that's how I like to work, right? If I feel like working, I work really hard. If I don't feel like working, I switch off. Obviously, for a journalist, that's a bit hard because the news is breaking. You can't be like, hey, I just don't feel like working, you have to work. But, I think as a team, we have a culture called Newsweek Way that really tries and defines what makes a Newsweek employee or Newsweek staff, and what are the core values we have. And one of the things that's always been important for me is to have people who really love what we do, who are committed to what we are doing, and we like to give them a lot of freedom, right? On the other end of the spectrum is the Netflix culture, which is quite interesting. There's a case study on it, there are books on it, where it's called no rules. They really do not have any rules at all, right? You can take as much vacation as you want. You can come into office whenever you want. There's just so much flexibility. And it talks about the parameters you got to have before you can give, so much freedom to people. I think for different companies, different things work. Or at least for my immediate team, I tend to give tremendous amount of freedom. I don't track how many holidays they take or anything. We set big goals and we track them using complicated OKRs and so on. or actually not complicated. They can be complicated to measure, but once done, they are quite easy to track. And then that just seems to work really well for us.
That's interesting. I thought we should wrap up by looking back and then looking forward. In leadership studies terms, this question of change is everything in leadership. And something tells me, and some of what you've alluded to as well, even before now, tells us that there was something about change in the world at the time when you took over Newsweek. If it wasn't then, and you went back a decade, or even back to when you were going to Mount Library, and there was no smartphone, and digital culture was different, how do you think your takeover would have played out?
Well, I think, first of all, I wouldn't have had the opportunity at all because Newsweek would have still been doing well in print. So I think in many ways, I mean, what I studied and my understanding of internet, which obviously empowered and drove the growth of digital media, right? It runs on internet. And in many ways, we were doing research about, massive bandwidth, wireless bandwidth, which is finally coming to reality, right? We were working on LTE and 5G, which is being rolled out right now in the last couple of years and now. And those were the things we were researching on in mid-2000s. So just kind of understanding that gave me a lot of insights about how the way people interact with the virtual world would change, with the internet will change. And today it's all about the metaverse and so on. And people who are doing research on that may become some brilliant entrepreneurs because they know inside out what's happening in that. They may have like 1,001 ideas about new businesses you could do, whereas I'm like just trying to study and learn and figure it out, right? So I think that's a very interesting question. And in many ways, I think my time here looking deep into internet, which transformed or pretty much killed Newsweek, was helpful in transforming Newsweek.
Absolutely. So when you look to the future and you look at Generation Z, right, and their habits, the way, their culture, and how technology itself is evolving, what worries you the most? When you think about the things that that have the potential to derail Newsweek or organizations like Newsweek, what is it that will keep you and your team up at night when you look at that, future space?
Yeah. I guess the next big thing is, how people are going to interface with the virtual world, right? How they're going to consume things. On one end, you have companies like Neuralink who are trying to connect computers straight to your brain, which is quite scary in one way because, if you can and if your brain can directly download information so you don't have to read anything, I don't know, is that a possibility? If you're in a virtual world or a metaverse world, how would you consume news in a metaverse world, right? And if you are not structured as a business for distributing and delivering news in that environment, we are out of business, right? And someone else may find ways to do business, deliver news to them in such a different way. So I think technology continues to evolve at such a rapid pace. There's no way of stopping that. It's just going to get faster and faster. I think the question is how we are able to embrace those changes and be adaptive and nimble enough to move, right? I think the danger for us now is, 5 years ago we were in very much a startup mode, so we had agility. As we get more structured, how do you create that agility still within an organization, right? I think more fundamental answer for us is how do you create this ambidextrous relationship within the company that has a startup mode while still being a very structured and large company that is constantly being innovative and creative, right?
Absolutely. Very final thing, your words of wisdom from you, concluding words. We have a room, an online, average 23, 24-year-old postgraduate students. You have maybe some 20-year-olds who are in year 2, year 3. they look at you and they're thinking, maybe 10 years from now, there could be another Dev Pragad, ex-Kings, smart, right? Seizing opportunity, not giving up, talking about resilience in this way. What can you tell them? You've said hard work. Are there two things you can tell them to keep at the back of their pockets as they leave Kings, aspiring to be you in another form?
I think ambition plays a big part. You know, are you hungry enough? There's a lot of people who want to be famous, which is good. It's good to have ambition, but it needs to go with hard work too. You got to let your work speak for yourself, because we are reaching an era where everything is measured, everything is tracked. There's very sophisticated frameworks to measure and track everything. So hard work plays a big part, but you know, ambition matters, because really what's stopping you from dreaming high? Really, it's only your mindset, right? Only the limitations you place on yourself in your own mind. You know, what is your passion? What do you want to pursue? I love it when people are just very tenacious, who just keep reaching out to me, even with my own staff, who reach out to me and it's like, well, Dev, I think we can do this. I think we can do that, right? I think more of that is not a bad thing, but you got to back it up with a lot of hard work and being very knowledgeable.
Well, on that note, sometime in September, October 2022, some 3 or 4 Pragad scholarships or Pragad scholars. Are we calling them Pragad scholars or Pragad fellows? We will know in another couple of months. We'll start at Kings, and we want to be able to track. We will select them. We're highly selective in that mode. There will probably be international students that may not have a chance to come to Kings without these scholarships. That really we find amazing because of the cadre of students we have across Kings, and we want to have you back at Kings to speak to them and to their mates next year. We love that you keep coming back to us, and we want to thank you tremendously. I want to give a shout out to Barney Welch, who's the program director of one of these programs. He's at home watching online because he has COVID, and a number of other people as well. I want to thank my colleagues who have made this possible. I won't call all of you by name, but ALC directors are here, the executive director from Nairobi, Shuva Anyoni, and our newly minted ALC director at Kings, Dr. Eka Ipe. I want to say a big thank you to our PhD students, our students across all 9 faculties who are online and here. You value this kind of approach. It's the very first one we've had, and it will continue. And you will be back, you have promised, sometime in the course of the academic year. I want to say big thanks to your colleagues who have graced us with your presence this evening. I want to say thanks for the publications on the chair. Take them, look at them. Some of us used to read them only in hard copy, all right? They're now digital. Now, let's drink something, let's eat, let's chat with our guests. Before we do that, help me say a big thanks to Dev Pragad.
Thank you. Thank you so much.